In terms of ethical issues associated with price, you could have price fixing, right? Price fixing controls the market price, or the supplier demand of a good or service, right? So essentially, it's when competing sellers agree to maintain a certain price. It often blocks new competitors from joining the market, and it also stops consumers from receiving the benefits of fair competition, right? You could have price increases. So price increases in bad circumstances. So, for example, there may be people who increase the price when they know that a good is scarce. So, for example, during the hurricane season, they may increase the price of water. So, typically, a bottle of water is, let's say, $1.59. When a hurricane hits and consumers need water and they're looking for water, a company might decide to start charging $4 for a bottle of water. We saw that with Hurricane Harvey. I'm going to focus specifically in my lecture on price discrimination and deceptive pricing, and I'll talk about those in the next slides. So, price discrimination occurs when a firm charges different prices to different customers for reasons other than differences in cost. So, if I were making a dress for two people and one person was much taller than the other, and I had to use much more fabric than I would need to on a person who's shorter, I might charge the person who's taller a little bit more, right? You could argue that this makes sense because you're using more material, yada yada. But if you have two people the exact same height, the exact same weight, everything is the same, and you charge one more because they have red hair, that's problematic, right? That becomes price discrimination. So Amazon was actually criticized for doing this in the early 2000s because it offered lower prices to new customers, right? So how do you get people hooked on Amazon? You offer those people lower prices, and then when they stop being new customers, you just start charging them regular prices. Um, Other companies, Staples, Steam, which is a video game store, and Amazon again, because Amazon can be an interesting company, was also caught varying the price of their products by geographic location, almost as much as 166% more, right? So let's say they charge a person, let's say you were buying a video game, and they charged the person in Michigan $50 and a person in LA 75, and they just based it on geography, even though there was no real difference in cost. That's price discrimination. That is illegal. Orbitz also got caught engaging in price discrimination. And what they were doing, I thought this was pretty interesting, is that they were caught charging more, almost up to, I'm sorry, as much as 30% more to customers who were using Mac computers versus PCs. Their rationale, if I remember correctly, was that people with Mac often have more money. Haha, jokes on them. And so they were charging more money. This is illegal. It's also problematic, and it is an ethical issue when it comes to price and marketing. So, deceptive pricing occurs when a seller states prices or price savings that mislead consumers or are not actually available to consumers. So, a competitor might do something like claim prices that are lower than their competition, right? So, they might say, we have TVs for $199, while our competitors' TVs start at $299, even though it's the same TV. And then you get there and they don't actually have televisions for $199. That is deceptive pricing. Deceptive pricing also occurs when people say they're going out of business. I've lived in locations, or at least visited locations, where people would have going out of business signs up for years, as in they've been going out of business for 15 years now. That is deceptive. Bait and switch, when you lure customers into the store for a very low price, but the item is just not there. And so instead, you offer them a more expensive product. So this happens a lot. Um, when you think about Black Friday, right? So I would say 5 years ago, a decade ago, all the big retailers would put out Black Friday ads, and they would say something like, we have this 52-inch television, and we're selling it for $250, right? Now what they are obligated to do, and what they will do because they've just had so much consumer backlash, is, Walmart, Target, whoever will say up front, we only have X number of these available in the store, or a limited quantity, because you get 500 people, or that's an exaggeration, maybe 50 people who are standing in line to get that television, but the store will only have three. Um, I'll give you another example that I think is also deceptive, and that's stores like J.C. Penney's or Kohl's. So these stores have a sale virtually every weekend, and every weekend they claim it's some new sale, right? When if you really look at their pricing, the pricing doesn't really change that much. But they're always saying this is the lowest price sale of the week of the year, and yada yada yada, and just kind of this constant sale situation. I think is somewhat deceptive. Again, looking at ethical issues within the 4P framework, we have to talk about promotion strategy and promotion. There are so many ethical issues that come up with this strategy. Bait and switch advertising, false and deceptive advertising, misleading advertising, promotional allowances, marketing to vulnerable consumers, sex-based advertising, you name it. I'm going to speak to a lot of these, not all, but a lot of these in the next few slides. So I mentioned marketing to vulnerable consumers. We could talk about a lot of groups as vulnerable consumers. So in certain instances, minority consumers are vulnerable. In certain instances, women can be vulnerable consumers. In certain instances, men can be vulnerable consumers. High school, elderly people, you name it. Every group has the opportunity to be vulnerable, or classified as a vulnerable consumer, and there are plenty of companies who take advantage of that. Specifically, though, here I'm going to talk about children. It's probably selling to children is problematic, right? One, they don't necessarily understand the intention to sell. So when they see advertising, they may see it as something interesting, fun, so on and so forth, but they don't understand that they're being persuaded as much as an adult would. They also don't understand the fine print. So things like batteries not included, which sounds like a small thing, but it adds to the price of the product, and it increases frustration oftentimes for parents. Optional accessories, right? So now we know that when people play video games, it often costs a lot of money to not only buy the video game, but to buy accessories within the video game. They don't understand the health consequences of certain advertising, which I'll talk about in the next slide. Um, when you're marketing to kids and they see Coca-Cola, or they see Cocoa Puffs, or um, Lucky Charms or whatever, the values being promoted tend to be kind of interesting, right? So maybe I gave bad example. Let me give better examples. When they see examples of, monster trucks being promoted, or really expensive clothing, or really expensive jewelry, essentially those advertisers are promoting materialism, which is something we may not want to have promoted to our young children. And then there is some family conflict, right? Kids don't realize that they're being persuaded, like the advertisers are intending to persuade, yet they still are persuaded, right? They buy into whatever advertisers are targeting, and it can cause family conflict. I remember going up to my mom plenty of times after watching TV and saying, I want X. Well, maybe my mom's not going to buy X, and you see this conflict. So I talked about this idea of unhealthy or healthy consequences, or unhealthy consequences associated with advertising to children. One way that companies have started advertising to kids right now is through the use of advert games. So examples of advert games I show on the right hand side here, where, excuse me, the company creates a video game or an online game, um, and kids can play it, but while they're playing it, they're being manipulated to want those products, right? They're being persuaded. A kid plays a game with Chester Cheetah, and it's about finding Cheetos. Yeah, the kid eventually is going to want Cheetos. If they're playing something like Oreo Land, yeah, the kid is eventually going to want Oreo games. So research has shown that when kids play these games, right, it increases nutrition poor snack food, right? So, or this thing says nutrient poor snack food, but nutrition poor snack food is fine as well. It reduces fruit and vegetable consumption. Um, these effects tend to be more dramatic for consumers who play avid games more regularly. So if the kid plays avid games a lot, this will happen. What's really interesting is that I'm talking about children as vulnerable consumers, but research has shown that there's no difference between a child and an adult when it comes to avid games. So if you as an adult play Oreo Land, or you play Doritos Dash of Destruction, I think that's what that says, you too will want more snack food and less fruit and vegetables. However, if you or a kid plays healthy food avid games, it actually increases fruit and vegetables, or increases fruit and vegetable consumption. Um, the issue, though, is who is going to make fruit and vegetable avid games? Who's going to make healthy food avid games? A lot of companies aren't going to, right? The people who manufacture or grow broccoli aren't trying to make a broccoli avid game, right? Oftentimes these products are made in interesting places and farmers and lots of things going on, and they don't really have a reason to make avid games. So who will do it? Who's going to step in and do it? And the argument against saying, hey, the government is going to do it, is that you have to ask yourself, again, is it the government's role to completely try to police these things? And should the government be spending money on something like healthy food avid games? Kind of an ethical question there. So another issue that falls under the promotion umbrella, ethical issue that falls under the promotion umbrella, is marketing stereotypes. Marketing advertisements often promote stereotypes, whether it's gender, racial, weight related, socioeconomic status, disability, LGBTQ, religion, non religious, so on and so forth. I like on the left side of the screen, you see these ads that try to counter these stereotypes, right? So the one in the top left hand corner, run like a girl, dance like a girl, sing like a girl, kick like a girl, fight like a girl. The one right next to it, I'm slow, but I'm lapping everyone on the couch, right? Trying to fight this weight and age related stereotype. And then the one on the bottom, you got to love this. Are you man enough to be a nurse? At the end of the day, we know that we need more men in nursing. Research has shown this to be true as consumers become older, as they become larger, so on and so forth, as patients, I should say. It's good to have men in those roles. It's also a pretty decent career choice at a time when men as a whole um, seem to be on the decline when it comes to these type of kind of established careers. But I would argue, like these ads on the left show, we do see some marketing that is trying to fight stereotypes. I thought I would include a few more. So in the left-hand corner at the top, you see this play set where it's a play kitchen, right? And you see both a boy and a girl who are both in the play kitchen. I would argue this wouldn't have happened 50 years ago. Right under that, you see an ad for a soccer mom who rides a Harley, right? So she's a Harley soccer mom. 50 years ago, again, you would not have seen that. This idea that this woman could be a soccer mom and also an avid Harley enthusiast. I mentioned in class, I think last week, about this idea that men now are featured in ads when it comes to childcare. And you see that in this ad. Dads don't take sick days. Dads take NyQuil, right? The ad on the right hand side. I really want to pull your attention to the ad in the middle. So this was actually very controversial when it came out. I think it came out at the end of 2017, Women's Running. It was controversial because they're featuring an overweight runner. And a lot of people came in and weighed in and said, hey, I don't think it's right that you feature an overweight runner. And other people came back and said, just because someone's overweight doesn't mean that they don't exercise or participate in exercising, and or that kind of putting this woman on the cover won't inspire more people to pick up running. But we do see this. We see ad or advertising and marketing that is targeting um, typically stereotyped groups. Okay, this is my last example of marketing stereotypes, I promise. I talked about the overweight runner that was featured in women's running. Now I'll talk about the UK version, United Kingdom version of Cosmopolitan, which featured Tess Holliday on its cover. I believe this was last year. Tess Holliday is an plus size model. Um, when you look at social science research. So an article came out, I believe, at the beginning of this year. Actually, I know it is. You can look at the article. I put the link at the bottom here. Americans' unconscious bias on the basis of sexual orientation and race dropped dramatically over the past decade, but bias against people based on body weight has increased. What does that look like? Well, what they found in their research is that sexual attitudes have changed about 33% in the last decade. So people are less likely to be biased against people whose sexual orientation is different than they were a decade ago. Similarly, racial attitudes, unconscious bias when it comes to racial attitudes has dropped about 17%, and skin tone attitudes about 15%. But from about 2004 to 2010, body weight bias has increased by about 40%, which means people tend to be more biased against overweight people. So when Tess Holliday was on the cover of Cosmo, this was a really big deal. And what we saw was a ton of backlash, right? So yes, you did see some people who were like, oh, this is awesome, body diversity, yada, yada, yada. But you saw a lot of people who were tweeting Tess Holliday, who were tweeting Cosmo and saying, you shouldn't put her on the cover, you shouldn't glamorize this, yada yada yada. And it's really interesting that UK Cosmo decided to do this knowing that that weight related bias is increasing. You could argue that maybe they're trying to play a part in decreasing weight related bias, or you could also argue that maybe they're just trying to get more people looking at the magazine. I mean, I'm not cynical, but we could say it's either one.